Welcome to Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and location for our latest virtual program. Today, it's our virtual author series. We're very glad to have with us Andy Strasberg, longtime baseball executive, author, collector, very close friend to Roger Maris. He's going to talk about his new book, My 1961. Before we get to Andy, we do want to take care of just a little bit of business here at the top of the show. As always, this program brought to you by the Ford Motor Company. We cannot do these programs free of charge without their generous support. So we do thank Ford Motor Company for being our sponsor throughout 2021. On to today's guest. He's formerly an executive with the San Diego Padres beginning in the mid-1970s. Worked for the Padres for 22 years. An author who has written several previous books, including Baseball's Greatest Hit, The Story of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, also has written Baseball Phantography, San Diego Baseball Phantography, friend of the late Roger Maris, and has the new book, My 1961, that is brand new and is available from August Publishing. We're very glad to have with us Andy Strasberg, good friend of the Hall of Fame. Andy, it's my first chance to talk to you, so this is an honor for me, a privilege. How you doing?
I am doing great, Bruce, and thank you. And thank you also. I want to add my appreciation to the Ford Motor Company, as well as the Baseball Hall of Fame. My relationship goes back to the late 50s, and then in the 1970s, I started to develop friendships with people like Howard Talbot, Ken Smith. So thank you to past employees, current employees, as well as Jane Forbes Clark. So I am honored and thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, we certainly share that feeling, Andy. Before we talk about the book and about your own 1961 and what it was like for you as a young fan at the time, I do want to talk about your recent generous donation to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And we're going to talk about this jersey that you provided to the museum. This photograph was taken December of last year. You are photographed here with former Hall of Fame President Tim Meade, and you're donating Roger Maris's jersey, which is now on display on the second floor at the museum. Tell us a little bit, Andy, about this jersey and what it personally means to you.
Well, to begin with, again, I want to acknowledge the person who took that photo also has baseball roots, and that would be Rich Key, former Dodger team photographer. And I asked him to record this because of the significance it was to me and hopefully to all baseball fans. But I became a Roger Maris fan once he was traded to the Yankees. And over the years, I've been extremely fortunate to collect a number of artifacts related to Roger. And at the top of the list would be one of his 1961 home Yankee jerseys. And my plan, quite frankly, was to donate this jersey to the Maris family. And I get together on an annual basis with them and explain what I wanted to do. And I have one of the Maris family members says, well, that's going to cause a little bit of a problem because there's 6 kids and we all have families. And I said, that's your problem, not my problem. And anyway, Roger Maris Jr. came to me a while back and he said, I think I've got a great solution. Why don't you donate it to the Baseball Hall of Fame? And that speaks volumes about the Maris family, about Roger Maris Jr. And I was thrilled and honored that has happened. And it's now on display for all fans to enjoy.
Here are a couple of updated photos taken just a couple of days ago. The Maris number 9 jersey, you can see it in the 2 different photos here. The photo on the left, it's juxtaposed against Mickey Mantle's number 7, and then an isolated shot of the Maris jersey on the right. So it is on exhibit on the second floor of the museum. It's in our timeline of baseball history display. It's basically in the section that's dedicated to the 1950s and 1960s New York Yankees. This was a jersey that Roger gave to you personally, Andy?
No, I was able to trade another collector who had this close to 40 years ago. But I have been aware that this jersey was available starting in 1975 when I first joined the Padres, because the original owner after the Yankees turned out to be the equipment manager for the California Angels. And he approached me and asked me, he found out, like most people in baseball, that I was a big Roger Maris fan. And he asked me, would you be interested in buying the jersey? Well, I thought, this is great. Yeah, I'd be interested. How much? He said $10,000. And at the time, I was making for the San Diego Padres $7,500. So it was a little bit out of my budget. So I followed the jersey around, and then eventually it got to a place where I could trade for the jersey. And frankly, there was nothing in my collection of baseball memorabilia that I would have held back on. So I was able to make that trade.
Of course, a flannel jersey, and a lot of fans have seen flannel jerseys and uniforms in baseball card photographs, film on YouTube, and that sort of thing. Maybe a lot of fans, though, haven't actually picked up a flannel jersey. It's pretty heavy, isn't it?
It is. It's the thing that amazes me for baseball uniforms would be how heavy they are, especially during August, July, August, sweating, double headers. Yeah, it's and the further you go back, the heavier the wool is. So, and I remember the very first time that I touched a uniform was a photograph that of Roger and I from 1966. And I had asked him the day before if I could have my picture taken with him at Yankee Stadium during batting practice. And when I put my arm around him, I was a little bit taken back because of the heat that was coming off of it and the fact that it was flannel.
One of the things I've always noticed about pictures of Maris wearing his Yankee jersey, his sleeves always seem to be so short. Did he cut them, or did the Yankees tailor his jersey specifically for his wants?
He had big guns. Yes. He wanted a little extra room for his biceps, and the Yankees customized his jersey. So all Maris jerseys are short sleeve, shorter than normal.
All right, that's very interesting. I did not know that. Interesting that Maris, a little like Ted Kluszewski, maybe not as big in the arms as Ted, but had those strong arms, wanted to show them off a little bit. Let's talk more about your relationship with Roger. Here we have a nice drawing of Roger. What was it you liked about him? I know that at the time, most Yankee fans were more enamored with Mickey Mantle. Were you a contrarian? Were you somebody that liked the underdog? What was it about Maris that drew you to him?
Well, growing up in New York, all my friends were baseball fans, and without exception, they were all Mickey Mantle fans. And I wanted a player that I could call my own. I guess growing up, I wasn't very good at sharing. And when Maris was traded to the Yankees, I was the perfect age. I was going to be 13, and there were a number of things that I read about him that appealed to me. Personality, in addition to how he played the game. And so I was reading a number of articles about him, and there was one that showed up in Sport magazine, and it was titled "Roger Maris Rejuvenates the Yankees." And I thought, how is that possible that one player can make a team younger? Of course, I had to look up the word rejuvenates because at 12 years old, that wasn't part of my vocabulary.
Yeah.
And so I started reading, and it talked about Roger as being an unselfish player, a team player, and a family man. Now, I will absolutely tell you that I'm sure those adjectives have been applied to a lot of players. But for me, that was the first time that it stuck. And as I said, I was the perfect age. And I was looking for a role model. I was looking for a ball player to call my own. And none of my friends were interested in Roger Maris. And so I started to follow him after he was traded from Kansas City to the Yankees in 1960. And lo and behold, Roger wins the MVP award. And, I'm elated. This is great. My guy is the most valuable player of the American League. And then the greatest summer of my life shows up in 1961.
It certainly helped that he was such a fine all-around ball player. There's a tendency to categorize him narrowly as this home run record holder, those two great seasons he had with the Yankees. But he had some good years in Kansas City. He had some good years later in his career with the Yankees. And even when he wasn't hitting in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 home runs, he was an excellent outfielder. He had a strong arm. I've read that he was a very good base runner. He was a fundamentally sound player. He was really a guy who was fun to watch.
He was. And it's interesting. The home runs were not the item that attracted me to him. It actually was his ability in the outfield, whether it was throwing to the right base, the strength of his throws, and more importantly, him playing the outfield at Yankee Stadium and other ballparks, and how athletic he was in catching a ball that was headed to the stands. I go into the actual date of June 11th, 1961 in the book, My 1961, because it was that game, it was that day because it was a doubleheader that really, really made an impression on me. Maris robbed first Ken Hunt of a home run going into the right field stands. And what had happened is that he caught the ball and then landed on the 40-inch wall, cement wall, and he was teetering back and forth and then fell in. And so that was game one. Later on in game one, he also robbed a home run off of Ted Kluszewski, as it turns out. And in game two, he hit two home runs, numbers 19 and 20. Well, 19 and 20, whether it was early in the season, that didn't register with me as being significant. The catches, that was it. And I all of a sudden turned it up as being a faithful and loyal fan of Roger Maris.
Now, Andy, was it in 1961 that you met him for the first time, or did that come later?
In 1961, my parents had the restriction that if I wanted to go to a Yankee game, I couldn't go alone. I had to go with a chaperone and an adult chaperone. And we only went to like 3 games. And so I'd get to the ballpark with the chaperone about 15 minutes before the game started. And then as soon as the game was over, we would leave. In 1962, the year that I turned 14, my parents felt that I was an adult and I didn't need a chaperone, lifted the restriction. So instead of going to 3 games as I did in 61, I went to 40 games in 62. And I'd get to the ballpark pretty early. For a 2 o'clock game, I would get there probably around 9:30 or 10. And the purpose, that was to meet Roger Maris and possibly get some autographs. And so I would be the first one in the ballpark when the gates went up, and I'd always go out to right field. And after a number of times, I realized that I couldn't speak to him because I was too nervous. And so what I did was I wrote a note. And when he got out of his car and he walked across 157th Street, I handed him the note while other kids were asking for autographs, and he took the note. It eventually got to the point, Bruce, where when he got out of his car, he would actually reach over the kids because he knew I was going to give him a note. And the note always explained something about what had happened the day before or a game. And it was, even if he struck out, I was very, very positive and always signed it, your most loyal fan, Andy Strasberg. And when the gates opened, I go stand in the right field stands and I'd watch him field fly balls. And I think it was persistence on my part, but that's how we first met. And he couldn't get rid of me.
So every time you handed him the note, he would read it right away.
No, he would take, there was a custom, which is no longer happening, that when players went to the ballpark, before they got into the ballpark, some fans would give a penny postcard, self-addressed, and the player would take that postcard and then they'd go in and they'd autograph it and drop it in the mail, which I thought was very, very smart. So it was not unusual for me to hand him a slip of paper, and then it became a custom. He knew that it wasn't going to be a self-addressed stamped postcard. He knew it was going to be a note from me, and would go into the ballpark and in the locker room. That's when I assumed he read the note.
Yeah. So it started out with you passing the notes to him. When did you actually exchange words for the first time?
Well, that same year, 1962, my friend said, "Why don't you ask Roger Maris for a baseball?" This is during batting practice, and I was nervous, but I got up enough courage, and I said, "Roger, can I get a baseball?" And so this is after months of handing him notes. And obviously he knew me, and to acknowledge me, he turned around and flipped a baseball to me in the stands. Bruce, I was astonished. I couldn't believe it. So much so that I couldn't lift up my left hand or my right hand. And so the ball hit me in the shoulder and rolled away. And when Roger was running in, I was yelling. I was no longer that shy kid. I was running in and I said, Raj, I didn't get the ball." And I saw Roger stop and speak to Phil Linz, utility infielder for the Yankees. Phil Linz comes walking out. Remember, the wall in right field is only 40 inches high. He comes up to the wall and he says to me, "Hold out your hand." So I hold out my hand and he puts a baseball in it. And I turn around to my buddies and I said, "I got a baseball from Roger Maris." And my buddy said, "No, you didn't. You got a baseball from Phil Linz, and we just saw it." So that was the first time that I had a conversation with Roger Maris.
Now, sometimes when players and fans have exchanges like this, maybe lasts a couple of times. But with you and him, it was something that really remained permanent. He remembered you. You obviously were not going to forget about him and the fact that he was taking these notes and trying to get baseballs to you. So you continued to meet with him over the years. You sent us some great photographs that I want to show. Here is one from 1966. This was the year after I was born, just to put it in my own personal context. But we're talking 55 years ago. This is the original Yankee Stadium with that wonderful facade. Tell us about this photograph here.
Well, the photograph was taken by Arnie Cardillo, who I went to high school with. And I knew this was going to happen, as did Roger, because I had asked him the day before. And the reason why there were two reasons why I wanted the photograph, obviously to record the relationship, but I read enough in the newspapers that Roger was probably going to be traded, which he was after the 66 season. So the day before I asked him if we could do that, he said yes. And then I showed up wearing very specific clothing. you probably can't see it in the photograph, but I'm wearing a pinstripe shirt and I rolled up my sleeves to replicate Roger's
Yeah,
jersey.
that's visible there. You can see, I mean, they're a little faded in the picture, the way the light's shining, but yeah, the pinstripes are there, and I can definitely see how you've rolled up the sleeves too.
And I must tell you that a couple of years ago, a very good friend of mine saw this picture for the first time. And his comment was, well, there is a picture of one of the great Yankee legends of all time and a guy who probably had trouble dating in high school.
Well,
You're
I
laughing,
think,
Bruce, you're laughing with me, right?
yeah, yeah, I
Oh,
think you're being a little hard on yourself there. Now, in the photo, it looks like you're much taller, but I'm guessing you're in the stands, right? You're
I'm
elevated.
in the stands sitting on that 40-inch wall.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you weren't that much taller than Roger.
No.
Yeah. For those fans who never experienced this original Yankee Stadium, which was renovated in the early 1970s, the Yankees had to play at Shea Stadium in 74 and 75. They then moved into the quote unquote new Yankee Stadium in 76. But that old stadium had a certain way that it resonated with fans. It was very regal. It was really a special place.
I loved going to Yankee Stadium and went a lot. And I always felt extremely comfortable. And I knew the ballpark, and this may sound crazy. I thought that the ballpark eventually became smaller to me as I grew up and I became more knowledgeable of the nooks and the crannies throughout that ballpark. And I got to be such a regular visitor and buying tickets to sit in right field that the security cop, Larry, would tell me, he would see me and he says, Andy, don't buy a high price ticket, just buy a general admission, come in, you can sit here. So yeah, I loved Yankee Stadium. It was my heaven. It was, I like to tell people that my address was 829 River Avenue, which, by the way, is on the other side of that picture. And that isn't a real address, but that's where approximately on the other side of the wall of Yankee Stadium, that would be the address, 829 River Avenue, the Bronx.
This was a downtime for the franchise, 1966, kind of reflected in the way that there are not many fans in the crowd. Do you remember who the Yankees played that day, just out of curiosity?
Absolutely, the Angels.
Okay.
Because there is during batting practice, after we had this picture taken, Bob Rogers, and Dean Chance were sitting on the wall. And I just, we had film. I had a photographer, Arnie Cardillo. And I said, guys, can I just slide in here for a picture? And they couldn't believe it. And so, yes, I do remember it was the Angels. And I got to show Buck Rogers that picture. He got a kick out of it. He didn't remember, but he did get a kick out of that time of his career.
He was a catcher with the Angels at the time, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. Later became very good manager with the Montreal Expos. Now, as you mentioned earlier, Maris ends up getting traded after the season. He goes to the St. Louis Cardinals, and I imagine that you continued to follow him long distance.
I did. I was going my first year of college, and I was crushed because Roger was no longer a Yankee, and he was in the National League, so he wasn't even going to be playing at Yankee Stadium. So I was a little bit upset, and when I got to college, Akron University, I put a poster of Roger over my bed in the dorm. And my roommate, Rich Schuster, he had a poster over his bed. And to this day, I still don't know what was going on in his mind because he had a picture of Raquel Welch from the movie 1 Million BC. And but that's Rich's story. I have a picture and a poster of Maris over my bed. And I'm telling everybody, that I'm good friends with Roger Maris.
And of course, the Cardinals with Maris end up playing in the World Series in 67 and 68. So you got to watch those games on national TV. I imagine you were a Cardinal fan during those series.
Yes, I switched, and I would not only go and see Roger as a Cardinal at Shea Stadium, I also drove down to Connie Mack Stadium.
Oh, nice. Now, you sent me another great photo, and this is from 14 years later. This is 1980. Roger looks a little different, as anybody would, over the span of about 15 or so years. You look a lot different. Your hair has really become curly. You've got the mustache. Tell us the circumstances of this meeting in 1980.
Well, over the years, Roger and I had a number of opportunities, social occasions. And so we became better friends. And I was no longer that starry-eyed kid. And as a result, I felt very comfortable around him. And I knew that Roger was coming to Dodger Stadium for an old timers game just before the Dodgers hosted the All-Star game. And so I reach out to the Dodgers and I tell them that I am going to meet Roger in the clubhouse for the old timers game. And by 1980, most of the people in baseball, certainly at the Dodgers, knew of our friendship. And so I asked the Dodgers for a very special circumstance. And I said, I'm going to be with Roger. I'd like a field pass. But I know that once the game begins, there's an announcement that said all non-uniform personnel needs to exit. And so I said, as a kid, I dreamt about someday sitting in the dugout with Roger Maris. And I asked the Dodgers permission if I could do that. And they said yes. And so I got to sit in the dugout. Now I was smart enough to sit at the end of the dugout. So I knew that the dugout, most of the players were going to sit closer to home plate. And Roger comes in just before the introductions, and he sits down between Lou Brock and Hank Aaron. And he puts his arms around both guys, and he looks over and he sees me in the corner of the dugout. He gets up and he comes over and he sits with me. I mean, he knew what I wanted. And anyway, it was such a great experience because I got to be 13 again.
Yeah.
And at one point when he was going to be introduced, he was holding onto his glove and he put it in my lap. He says, got to go to work. Watch this for me. So,
yeah. So this was 1980, Dodger Stadium in LA. You were working with the Padres by this time. There was a wonderful story that you told on another show, and I'm going to ask you to tell that again. You were working with the Padres, I think it might have been in spring training in Arizona, and Roger happens to show up. He asks for you, and then you run and get your wife, because your wife by this point had never met Roger. Tell us that story.
Well, it wasn't spring training. It was 1978. It was at the winter baseball meetings.
Okay.
And I'm in a room with a number of other baseball executives. And we're all have common problems when it comes to the business side of baseball, not the playing side of baseball. And we're trying to find solutions and come up with suggestions and ideas. And at one point, one of the guys that I work with, Jim Weigel, he taps me on the shoulder and he says, there's a guy out in the hallway and he's got a crew cut and he would like to see you. And so the winter meetings that year, they were in Florida. And I thought, Roger retired in Florida, in Gainesville. I wonder if he made the trip. So I run out into the hallway and it's Roger. And I hadn't seen him since his last game when he retired in 1968. So I said, Roger, it's so great to see you. I can't wait to introduce you to my wife. And he says, why don't you get her? I'm going to be sitting over there. And he pointed to a table. And why don't you bring her over? Now, at that table, it was Dick Young, a baseball writer, New York baseball writer, Mo Drabowski, and Whitey Herzog. Well, I go and I look for my wife, and I found her. She was sunning herself by the pool. And excitedly, I explained to her, Roger Maris is here. You're going to get to meet him for the first time. Follow me. And she says, well, I can't go like this. I can't wear a bathing suit. I've got to do my hair, put makeup on. I'll meet you. And I explained to where we were. So I go back to where Roger said he would be, and I stand directly behind him because I don't want to interrupt his conversation. He's talking to these guys. And I'm listening, and Roger is talking about this kid that was his fan when he played for the Yankees, and how this kid got a job working in baseball for the San Diego Padres, and how he became friends with this kid and how proud he is of this kid. And I realized he's talking about me. And so I stepped from around so he could see me, and I interrupted him, and I said, my wife is on the way. And we went out to dinner that night, Roger and his wife, Pat, and my wife and I. And it was probably the first time in person that I was able to talk with him, not so much as a little kid, but as an adult. Now, I'm not going to say 100% adult, but I was still very much a fan. And Roger just kept doing things for me that just grew the relationship and the friendship. And that was one of the most memorable experiences that I ever had.
Now, that was quite a group that he was hanging out with. Mo Drabowski, who was a very good pitcher, starting pitcher and a relief pitcher, probably the greatest prankster in Major League history. Hall of Fame manager Whitey Herzog, who at the time was probably manager of the Rangers or Angels, I'm going to guess at that point. And then one of the greatest, most legendary of sports writers, Dick Young, all hanging out with you and Roger Maris. Quite a collection.
Yeah, it was a significant time in my life, and I didn't send you the pictures of that we took. I'm very much about documenting in photographs things that have happened to me over the years. Starting back in 1958, my first trip to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and that was as a result of my father taking me, but also taking that picture. And so if the opportunity presents itself, I'd love to have a recorded document, a photograph of whatever that experience was.
Andy, you obviously knew Roger Maris better than a lot of people. I never got to meet him, never got to interview him. I'm going to throw some words out at you about him. Tell me if they're accurate or not. Quiet, reserved?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends on who's asking and what the circumstances are.
Humble guy?
Unbelievably so. You gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Unbelievably humble. Yes. And so is his family. Pat Maris, his wife, the 6 children, all humble. Yes.
There's a term in baseball when a player maybe lets his ego get in the way and he meets ordinary people or fans, quote unquote. And the player maybe is a little standoffish and kind of big leagues or big times the person. I'm guessing Roger Maris was the opposite of that.
Well, he was the opposite for me. And it's interesting, this picture, I don't know if it's still up, but this picture at Dodger Stadium, about a half an hour before that picture was taken, Roger and I are in the locker room, and I asked him why. Why me? Why did you do the things for me as a kid? Why did you respond? And he said that it was sincerity and consistency and loyalty. And I, I'm the one that came out much better in that friendship as a result of Roger and his generous way with me.
Let me throw two more adjectives your way about Maris. Tough and tenacious. Accurate?
Did you say tough and tenacious?
Yes.
On the ball field? Absolutely. No one broke up double plays better than Roger Maris. Nobody. Um, there's probably 100 people that are watching this that are going to argue with me, but he had a great reputation of breaking up a double play in a very clean way. So he didn't go after somebody with spikes high and to try to hurt them. He went after the shortstop or the second baseman so that they wouldn't be able to get the throw to first. So tough and tenacious, those are great adjectives describing Roger and how he ran the bases and how he played baseball.
Sadly, we lost Roger Maris only 5 years after this picture was taken. It was 1983 that he was diagnosed with lymphoma. He then passed away December 14th of 1985. Not to say that he became a forgotten figure in the interim, but certainly when this film came out, 61, this renewed a lot of interest in the late Roger Maris. This was a film that not only did you work as an advisor on, but you got to make a little bit of an acting appearance. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and again, it seems like my life revolves around baseball. Oh, wait a minute, it does. And 1961 was the greatest summer of my life. And when HBO was putting this together, I was no longer with the Padres, and I got a phone call. Actually, it was a voicemail message from Ross Greenberg. And it said, "Hi, my name is Ross Greenberg. I'm with HBO. When you get a chance, would you call me? I'd like to talk to you." Well, he left a telephone number with a 212 area code. And so I knew it was New York. What I didn't know is that Ross was the president of HBO Sports. So when I got him on the line, I said, "Hello, I'm returning your call." And he said, "Andy, do you know who I am?" And I, being kind of snarky, I said, "Yeah, Ross, I figured it out. You're with HBO. You want me to try HBO for free for 30 days to see if I like it. And then if I like it, then I should pay for a subscription." Fortunately, he laughed. And then he said, "No, we're doing a movie about Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle in the summer of 1961, and we'd like to hire you as a consultant." And this was time travel. This was time travel for me because I got to go all the places that I wanted to go when I was 13. And whether it was in the locker room, in the dugout, on the field, it didn't matter, or the apartment that Bob served, Mickey Mantle and Roger shared. As a result of this movie, I got to go on all those sets, and the guy who made all this happen was Billy Crystal. Mm. And Billy and I are the exact same age, and he was a Mickey fan, and he was incredibly generous and understanding about my relationship with Maris, and absolutely went out of his way. Everybody did, went out of their way on that set to make me feel comfortable because I was out of my element. I mean, it's a movie. It's a movie about sports. It's a lot of things that are going on that I had never experienced before. And so halfway through the movie, Billy comes to me and he says, "Andy, you were hired as an advisor, but how would you like to get in front of the camera and have a cameo?" "Yeah, that'd be great." And he said, "Okay, how would you like to be an umpire?" And I looked at him, I went, "Not interested." Well, he couldn't believe what I was saying. And as a result, I said, "Billy, have you got a video of Maris when he hit his 61st home run? Yeah, yeah. I said, let's take a look at it and I'll explain. So we go into and see the video. And as Roger is rounding third, coming into home, there's Yogi Berra, next batter, Frankie Prudente, the bat boy. They greet him. Maris steps on home plate, and now he's on his way to the dugout. And before he gets to the dugout, one fan, probably around 18 years old, very, very politely comes out to shake Roger's hand and pat him on the back. I said, Billy, when I was 13, I wanted to be that fan. And now I'm 52 and I still want to be that fan. And Billy said, okay, that's the role you play.
Nice.
And we shot that, and Billy shot it so that you could see my face for about a second and a half, unless you stop it, which I normally do. And it was wonderful to be the guy who congratulates Roger. And I knew at the end when they did the credits, I knew I was going to get technical advisor credit, but Billy also listed me as an actor, home run 61 fan. And after we shot the video, it was everybody on the set obviously had heard the story and knew, and came over and congratulated me. So I've been very lucky and very fortunate, and it has to do with Roger Maris to this very day.
Well, you were part of an excellent film. I really enjoyed 61, and I thought both the lead actors, Barry Pepper as Roger Maris, Thomas Jane as Mickey Mantle, not only did they look the part, but I thought they played their parts exceptionally well. We have just a few minutes remaining with Andy. I want to talk a little bit about your Hall of Fame relationship. That started back in 1958, 3 years before that Hallmark 61 season. And here's a photo of you in front of the Hall of Fame. And yeah, that's what it looked like back in the late 1950s. Tell us about this day.
Well, we drove up from New York, and there was it was the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall, and my dad is the reason that I fell in love with baseball. And my mother, I want to give equal credit, and my mother was the encourager to keep following my dream about not being just a fan, but working in baseball. And on this particular day, it was my first trip to Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame. And as I said, my father brought his camera and documented my first trip to Cooperstown.
That's amazing. It looks a little different today, but there are some parts that are still similar. Here's a later visit, 1971. You're much older here, and you're with a gentleman that maybe not a lot of baseball people know about. We certainly know about him in Cooperstown. His name was Ken Smith.
Yeah, Ken was originally a sports writer, a baseball writer, and then became an executive for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I developed a friendship, as I said, with Ken as well as Howard Talbot. Again, being persistent, knocking on doors, and introducing myself. And at one point, I thought maybe I should just ask him if I could have my picture taken with the bat that Roger used to hit his 61st home run in the ball. And as you can tell, that is in the Hall of Fame in front of the exhibit. And there's Ken holding the ball. I'm holding the bat, and Howard Talbot took the picture. And yeah, that's a great photo. And the other part of this is I had a full beard, and I had just graduated from college. And it was Howard who said to me, Andy, you're not going to get a job in baseball with a full beard. So around the corner from that picture, I went into the bathroom and shaved, came out and took the picture.
Another great photo, more recently, 2005. And I was actually in the Bullpen Theater on this day when you delivered a wonderful talk about Roger Maris. We've covered some of that material here, but you went into special depth. I think it was an hour-long conversation about Maris and your relationship. So this a little more recent visit, but certainly a very memorable one as well. I want to touch upon briefly this one-act play. I found this photo of you on the internet, and you actually did perform this one-act play. Tell us about it. What was the theme of it?
It was 10 years ago, and it was about my relationship with baseball, starting from the day I was born, and my father noted it in his diary. And I found his diary after he passed away, and it happened to be the day that Leo DeRocher went from the Dodgers to the Giants, and my father was a Giant fan. He filled the entire page with remarks about that, except for the last line where he said, Helene and I had a baby boy and we named him Andrew. So I got one line. Anyway, this is an 80-minute play, 52 pages of script that I had to memorize. And I just enjoyed this so much. And I was so pleased with the reaction from the audience, because I took them through all the things that had happened to me in baseball that were memorable and what I thought would be interesting.
Let's talk a little bit more about your newest project, My 1961, forward by our friend Marty Appel. I saw another interview that you did. You mentioned that 70% of the book is about baseball, much of that centered on Maris, but also on other parts of your baseball career. And the other 30%, interestingly, about your own experiences. You were 12, 13 years of age in 1961. So in a lot of ways, this is not just a baseball book, but a personal memoir.
Exactly right. I was so lucky that Kevin Reichart of August Publications, he saw my proposal, and he realized there's been a number of books written about that 1961 Yankee season in Maris, 6, 7 books about from broadcasters, teammates, sports writers, even Maris himself wrote about that season. But what attracted him was no one had ever written it from the perspective of a 13-year-old. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is. This is not 70 plus years old reflecting on what happened. I actually kept notes as a result of a school project when I was in 7th grade. And I had, over the years, collected a number of newspapers. So I had all of this at my fingertips. And so, yeah, this is a coming of age book, whether it's about girls, food, television, rock and roll, school. I go into detail about my teacher, my homeroom teacher, Mr. Clements, mm-hmm. who, by the way, I'm still friends with after all these years. And I was trying to entertain people in our class. And so I was fighting Mr. Clements for the attention, because Mr. Clements was a very cool guy and still is. But he would always win because he was the teacher. So 30% of this are those experiences that I had as a kid in 1961. And yes, 70% of it is focused about baseball, with the majority of it being about Roger Maris.
The book is out. It's available at several websites. We'll put 2 up here. One is Amazon.com, which is always a good source for getting books. The other is directly from the publisher, and their website is augustpublications.com. Again, augustpublications.com. The latest book from Andy Strasberg, My 1961, as he looks back at what it was like as a 12, 13-year-old boy growing up in New York, what it was like being a baseball fan, and what it was like following Roger Maris. Andy, we really appreciate your time. It's been very entertaining, a lot of fun. We'll have to have you back, because I had all these questions I wanted to ask you about your Padres days. I wanted to ask about Ray Kroc and the San Diego Chicken and Oscar Gamble. So we'll have to do that at another time, because unfortunately we're out of time. But please come back and tell us about some of those Padres stories, if you will.
Thanks a million, Bruce. I very much appreciate everybody's interest.
Again, the book, My 1961 by Andy Strasberg. Our thanks to Andy, and of course, our thanks to our sponsor, the Ford Motor Company. Their generous support makes this and other programs possible. Folks, we hope you've enjoyed the program with Andy. Take care. Have a great day.